Excellent. I think we've let everybody in. So, hello and welcome. This is our AIESEP Connect 2025-2026 program that is just started, and we're really excited to be starting with one of our special interest groups. So we have been mapping out the AIESEP Connect for the whole of 2025-2026. There are a few spaces still left in 2026. So if you have a topic area that you would like to come and discuss, come and share with others, then please just get in touch with me and we can pop you into the program for 2026. We also are, as I said, we're starting with one of our brand new special interest groups. So if you are interested in becoming a special interest group, please also get in touch with me. I'm one of the special interest group liaison officers, and I can help you get yourself started. We have a lovely handbook that can walk you through how to get yourselves up and running, and the whole process. But today, as I say, we're starting with one of our brand new ones, which is our primary and elementary special interest group. They're going to share some discussion about contemporary issues. And what we're going to hear is a variety of different presenters. And we're also going to have time for a discussion and question answers. If you do have questions as we're going along, please put them in the chat so that we can come back to them. And also just to remind you that everybody's views are their own thoughts rather than necessarily coming from an AIESEP organisation viewpoint. So please be respectful to each other and also be our lovely kind selves in our AIESEP family and community. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Maya to introduce the whole of the primary and elementary special interest group team.
So as I'm in Ireland, everybody, good morning, though I know some of you, it could be good afternoon at this stage. And welcome to our primary, elementary, physical education SIG is Connect. So I'm delighted that you could join us today. So my name is Maura Coulter, as Christy says, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor in primary physical education and also the Associate Dean for Research at Dublin City University's Institute of Education in Ireland. As chair of the AIESEP SIG, I'm surrounded by excellent colleagues on the executive team, and that's Nicola Cars from the University of Edinburgh. As vice chair, Vicky Randall is our SIG secretary, and Grace Cardiff, who will be looking after our early career researchers and is representing those members. Together, we're committed to creating a dynamic and supportive space focused on research, practice and professional collaboration in this vital area of physical education. So the primary SIG was officially launched during the AIESEP International Conference in Florida earlier this year. And we're delighted to say that the SIG is strong and our membership is growing through our social media platforms and just general word of mouth across the globe. So our mission is to establish a dedicated space for networking and for scholarly activity amongst the AIESEP members, particularly those with a shared interest in primary physical education. We aim to provide an international platform where this expertise can be brought together, enabling us to collectively influence the direction of the field and also to elevate primary physical education visibility more globally. So today we're delighted to have brought the first of our experts in the field of primary physical education to share a flavour of their research with us. And first of all, as Christy says, just to give you a little bit of an overview, I'll introduce the presenters together, all three together. I'll let them speak one after the other. Then we'll have some discussion or questions. And please do put some in the chat as we go along because our time is short, so it'd be nice to keep things moving. Following the presentations and today's Connect, we will circulate some more supporting materials and some information. We'll post some further information on our social media channels, particularly on LinkedIn after today's session. And of course, you can engage with our speakers themselves through their own email addresses also. So moving swiftly along, our first presenter today is Dr. Gerald Griggs, and Jez is an academic dean and dean of Manchester campus at the University Campus of Football Business. Jez has published widely on primary physical education and most notably with Routledge. He's a member of the cross-party parliamentary group on a fit and healthy childhood. And alongside Vicky, he is co-author of the recently published book, Contemporary Issues in Primary Physical Education. And his presentation today draws upon one of the chapters within the book entitled The Dawn of a New Era, Examining a Case for Core Physical Education. So Vicky then will follow Jez, and Vicky is a visiting associate professor at the University of Gloucestershire. She's the secretary, as I said, of our SIG and is co-author of the book with Jez that I just mentioned, and her presentation draws on another chapter within the book entitled Developing a Whole School Movement Culture. And bringing up the rear is Grace Cardiff, and Grace is an assistant professor and early career researcher at Maynooth University in Ireland. And Grace will speak about her research on student voice practices in primary physical education, particularly drawing on her own PhD research. Grace will also offer practical strategies on how to position student voice at the heart of everyday teaching and learning in the primary PE classroom. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Jez, who will kick off today's presentations.
Good morning. I just want to check you can hear me first.
All good.
Excellent. And then I'm going to attempt to share a screen here too. So I need to make sure that you can see this.
That's good, Jez. If you want to do presenter mode, yeah, exactly. Great.
Okay. It's not quite how I wanted that. Never mind. Seem to have gone off video. There we go. I think I might be back. Is that okay there? Can you see that?
Yeah, Jez,
It
that's
seems to have
fine.
it's got a bit stuck on presenter mode, so we'll go with that. I'll try and put myself back on video. Zoom seems to be a little temperamental for me. I seem to have disappeared off camera, but can you see at least the presentation?
Yeah, Jez, we can hear you loud and clear. We can see the presentation. So I think you're good to go.
Okay. Right, and thank you very much, everybody. For those who will be watching, there are a few slides just to give a little bit of structure. For those who are just listening in, I'll do my best to elaborate on a few key points. As Maura's indicated, this is based on one of the book chapters from our Contemporary Issues text. It's not entirely everything, but at least it's kind of aligned to the key points and arguments, and I kind of want to explain why I've been drawn to wanting to give a high quality presentation and present high quality slides on high quality points. And if that penny hasn't dropped on you yet, it will in a few slides. Right, in terms of the development of physical education in the UK and kind of around the world, a little bit, but I can only really talk of the things that I see. We've seen physical education and sport develop often particularly around particular action and reaction. Sometimes that can be between particular lobby groups, sometimes it can be particular fads and fashions, but often those particular points act as catalysts for change. And from the slides that I'm for those who are just listening in, it's key to understand that COVID has been quite a major catalyst in terms of core being back on the conversation again. It comes around from a reaction to concerns by a number of groups, but on the particular House of Lords Select Committee, looking at mental and physical well-being. And that it's actually indicated in the report that this is very much a problematic point that's perpetuated across decades in governments. So these things are not happening in isolation, and that the idea of COVID reaching a point of which we might maybe react to. I personally can't think of a time that I've had conversations with colleagues and seen things on either professional articles or read things on LinkedIn that I've seen such a binary reaction to in terms of whether core it should be happening or not. The closest things I've seen in my lifetime that I'm experiencing personally have been around the idea of almost fox hunting, as in you're either for it or against it. Brexit, you're either for it or against it. Core, you're either for it or against it. And it's, for me, I've not seen this kind of visceral reaction for such a long time, but particularly around this topic. I'm finding that the moment I even question the idea or even want to talk about the idea of this, oh, that means you're against it then. It's like, no, I'm just not saying yes immediately. I just want to talk about it. And for me, there are realities and implications to core. And all I want you to do is to stop and think about what it means. In the book chapter, we got to a point in the timeline that we did where we actually decided that a SWOT analysis was just a simple way to illustrate the ways to look at it. I'm trying to develop something more to go down this rabbit hole perhaps a little bit more and explore the issues at the moment in a topic. But I've actually decided to go and work on the collaborative project with someone not in the UK for that very reason, because I'm finding it hard to talk with someone else that doesn't give me that kind of vibe or feeling. Now, the idea of core isn't a unique, we're further along this perhaps in the UK than many, but a lot of these influences that have come through, some people, again, you're so close to the day job sometimes you don't understand the wider global forces that are happening around you, and that core is very much one of the things that comes from the idea of the global educational reform movement. And there are many good papers and commentaries written by Solberg, and I've referenced a few on the slide here, but I do recommend you go and see them. But this idea that and GERM is quite interesting as an idea here, because the point is like GERM, Global Educational Reform Movement, as an acronym. It is an epidemic. It does spread. It does infect. It is viral. And there are various things and features that go with it, and core is one of them. We saw this most sharply in the Educational Reform in terms of the curriculum, the Educational Reform Act, referencing on this slide. And what that gave us was, in the UK, the national curriculum and the things that jumped out as a result of that. But the idea of like standardization, these things go back. I mean, in the UK, the curriculum was born out of conversations in the 1980s. And you started to see this go across Nation at Risk in America, most famously as well. But it permeated across different aspects of education on the globe. Europe wasn't immune. Asia wasn't immune. But you realize that one of the things that drove a lot of this was also the need for comparison. PISA data becomes one particular sort of feature that some of you will know. How do you know whether this country is better than this country? It's like the world of education existed before that happened, but these are some of the key features that you begin to see. Now, for those people who want to go down this more, because again, there's one thing about signposting it more, German, the idea of the educational reform movement comes out of human capital theory, HCT. And we could do whole presentations of that, and I'm not going to do that. But one of the key aspects and the consequences of this is that there becomes an increased focus on economic productivity. So I'm asking yourself, what is the point of education? In higher education, we've seen that as in the only purpose of higher education then becomes employment, and that we see progression into employment. And these, again, some of the things that come about as a result of them. But I mentioned at the beginning about the overuse deliberately at the beginning of the word high quality. And it's something that for those that see it and hear it all the time, those people who speak to colleagues in geography, they're not talking about high quality geography. We're not talking about people in art, we're talking high quality art. And yet the amount of times you speak to folks in physical education cultures now cannot say the words physical education without proceeding with them with the words high quality. It's like the word physical education no longer exists. High quality physical education exists. And I'm finding that quite interesting. But also the thing that it throws up practically are frameworks, skills, competencies, outcomes. And again, a generation back, these things, they weren't there. And yet you think about the amount of professional frameworks now that we all adhere to and that we have to show competencies against and map against. These are part of this broader HCT theory. They're part of more the global educational reform movement, but they're also wrapped up into this kind of social control and economic productivity thinking. The next few slides for me, therefore, become quite important. What you start seeing from Solberg's work, particularly, is the 5 common features of any of the policies and conversations that underpin the idea that you have standardization of education, which again in lay terms often becomes curriculum. The idea of having a search for low-risk ways of reaching learning goals. For many, that can be reduced down to things as basic as fitness testing. Now, I know most of the physical education profession don't want to admit that that's a possibility, but we've seen many strategic initiatives, resulted down to the most basic statistics that can be counted. Sometimes that was about assessment and high quality alleged on one end, but actually just became participation and how many people you can count at the other end. So, there's questioning about whether this is a legitimate direction to go in. There's always use of corporate management models. Examples of this might be having KPIs, and that might be right down to, we have to have a target for 82% of 11-year-olds can put a beanbag in a hoop. And that might seem kind of like, no, that's not what we mean. Well, we have it for how many children can swim 25 meters. So you start seeing this permeate out into operational things. So it exists. And there is a world of test-based accountability. There is, whether it be testing, it might even be into league tables. And core is one of the 5. And this is one of the things to understand, just that when you have a macro view and you look out, it's not core being the thing that is in front of you. Core is merely one of the things. But as Solberg indicates here is that it's almost impossible to have one without the other. And what I find fascinating in conversations, again, with colleagues around this idea of core, is that I meet people who are passionate about core, and yet there's a view that they can somehow cherry pick. So yeah, we'll have core, but but league tables won't apply to us. We won't have to have those. It's like, well, what English and maths do? Well, what makes you special in your new world that you're creating, in that your panacea of holistic core suddenly won't have these other features, because every other subject has to have them. Again, I find that an interesting concept, that the view that, and again, that's not to undermine or decry people's idea of being passionate about, holistic PE and going, yes, but I think PE is this, and I think it's really important that it underpins every child. Fine. So someone's going to have to measure that, because that's how it works. Oh no, that's not what I had in mind. It's like, but you can't have one without the other. So 2 slides to consider at the end of this, without getting into more theoretical stuff or referencing here. In conversations I've had with others and things that I've read, national governing body stuff that I've looked at, I always have to ask myself, what drives the motivation? And what drives the motivation for any of us who do or don't want core? And again, just by talking about it, I need to be really clear here. I'm not against core as an idea. I merely just wish to discuss it. Is the move to core about the inevitability of the global education reform movement? Is it just inevitable that we move that way? And is that what this kind of glacial drive over time that we've seen a curriculum, and eventually this is the way that we'll go? Is it that you or others that you're listening to, they have a real belief, they're absolutely, passionate to go, no, PE is core, it's that important, it is my main driver. And again, you meet people that way, and that's great. Is it out of something quite the opposite? Is it about fear and insecurity? As if I don't have PE as core, it will cease to be, or it will be seen less important, or it's not significant, and therefore it will disappear. And therefore I'm afraid of that, and therefore put PE core in central is my reason for wanting to do it. I'm afraid that I believe too often it's the 4th one. For me, there's a lack of critical engagement and blind following, because if lots of people say it should be core, it should be core. Too often I speak to people And almost by the end of the sentence where I go, should PE be core, I almost don't get the last syllable out before they've already said yes. And I find that, again, quite interesting to illustrate the point, as critical debate here is almost not allowed in the way that I'm hearing at the moment, in the UK at least. Or is there something else? Is there something else that I've missed here? Are there other drivers? Or is it a combination of all of the above? Now, in posts I've engaged in with LinkedIn with others, and some of the questions that I've posed in the text, and other questions I will pose in the text that I'm currently writing. So me, key questions and considerations here at primary level is, if we are going to have core, what would the core content look like that we could all agree upon? Because again, when I read people's responses, or I listen to what people's responses are to me, they actually give me different reasons as to why PE should be core. Well, then there needs to be an agreement of what that actually looks like. I think there's a serious question about how we would train and fund a workforce that at primary level historically hasn't delivered the subject well. I know some people would disagree with me about that point, but there's a lot of research evidence to point in that direction that exists so far. And with the existing workforce that is there currently delivering it, how would you upskill that existing workforce to deliver whatever the core content is that you're going to have? A fourth one I find interesting is, how will you get people to assess at all, let alone well? There is, again, significant amount of evidence, recent Ofsted reports, and point in the direction as well, is that assessment's either not happening or it's not very good. Well, if we're going to move into the fifth point about having league tables, then how valid are league tables and assessments on the basis of the fact that it's not being delivered well at present, it's not being assessed well, and yet this is in the public domain about how well your school is going to be delivering physical education. And then there's two more, which are broader points about what core is, and you only have to go into national curriculum documentation to really kind of dig into these. But maths and English are core, as a point that they actually are required to and do underpin other subjects. So what will that mean for physical education? How will that underpin other subjects? Because it's going to have to, if it's core, that's one of the definitions of it. That will probably need a complete refiguring of the curriculum. But does physical education get the right to be at that table and be as holistic? Because that might need a bigger overview. And then the last one is about inclusion, because again, a core subject has to be massively inclusive. And then I'm only thinking here about particular activities that are done within physical education, and questioning, are those practices as they currently stand inclusive, and will that merit what core requires? So for me, there are quite a lot of questions here to answer. They can all be answered positively, but they need workable solutions to make them work. And just to go yes actually diminishes the reflection that's required on this list of questions to have workable solutions to make that viable. For those people who are seeing the video here, thank you for your time. That's a copy of the book. That's my email address, which is g.griggs@ucfb.ac.uk. And if anyone wants to follow up with particular references that I've alluded to there, then I am happy to send them to you on request. Thank you for your time, and I shall pass the baton on to my other talented colleague, Randall. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jez. How do I follow that? Well, lots of questions being posed there, and I know Jez has started to address. As I'm talking, I'm going to move my screen to presentation as well, folks, so bear with me. I know Jez has alluded quite a lot there to some of the debates that are happening currently in England and across the UK. We are not on a lone journey in regards to curriculum reform at the moment. I noticed 2 days ago, New Zealand's curriculum has just been released, and conversations and discussion around that is taking place in Ireland also. We are halfway through that. So this is a really interesting time to discuss these issues. And in terms of core, we're looking at those subjects that have historically been given, I guess, that hierarchical status in terms of that curriculum documentation. And PE currently being foundation subject in England, which is alongside humanities, music and the arts, we sometimes feel that our content might get lost. So this is a really interesting and current debate at the moment. And I want to kind of build on that with a conversation around much more kind of debates around the issue around physical activity and where physical activity sits within all of that. And this comes to and extends out of the PE curriculum. And again, it's built on one of the chapters within the book. And within that chapter, it is raising questions around our relationship with movement and physical activity, us as an individual, personal, professional, primary PEs, elementary PEs relationship with movement and physical activity. So where's the relationship as a subject? And what relationship do we want? What are we asking for? And this, again, builds on Jez's point about what are we actually asking for in elevating the subject hierarchically up the curriculum ladder? What are we actually asking for when we want more movement or increase our physical activity of young people in a primary education? So I definitely won't be able to answer all of these. These are more sort of questions I'm posing to you reflectively today to think about what your relationship with these questions are and questions that we pose within the chapter. And we have a really, there aren't many things universally as a subject we agree on as what a curriculum content should hold. And I have come across very few people who have argued against the importance of physical activity in primary education and specifically in primary PE. It seems to be a global unifying relationship that we have, that as an outcome, as a vehicle, as an experience, physical activity plays a really important role. But it's not just in physical education where our bodies move, where a child's bodies move. And the arguments we've seen for the importance of it repeatedly, and this list of citations could go on and on and on over several pages, is its relationship with cognitive, psychological, physical. That also means our emotional and mental well-being and health, our physical health. And we know that a positive relationship and a regular habitual relationship with physical activity is going to be a characteristic that leads towards a child's entitlement to a good health. So we're not posing physical activity in this question and in this chapter as it's not physical activity that's a contentious issue. I think we would find many people are in agreement with it. I'd love to hear to the contrary. But what I am posing is that it's enactment, it's framing, it's where do we then go with that? That is the challenge that we have in our schools. And I've posed here 3 potential options. With declining levels of child physical activity, and Jez mentioned and alluded to COVID as an interesting marker in our recent history around changes in behaviours to physical activity. With declining levels that we're concerned around globally, and certainly within England, we've seen those patterns shift and change and actually come up to slightly more stable levels as they were pre-pandemic at the moment. But what are our options? Well, schools could take option 1. We are going to put in place more targeted physical activity interventions, and that is to help address this declining level of physical activity. We could have option 2, which you might go, oh, what's the difference between the two? Well, option 2, I'm suggesting is a more of a whole school health promotion approach. And if you're sort of saying what is the difference between the two, because they do appear similar, the difference is in its approach, in its rationale, and in its positioning within school. Within option 1, we're looking at addressing the declining levels directly, but we're not addressing the causes of it. So we are going to put in an approach that allows children to move more, and that will combat or counteract a lack of moving. In option 2, which is what I'm going to go on and frame a little bit more, we're looking at health promotion. We're looking at movement being an inherently good thing in its own right, and the purpose and motivation of health promotion is not to directly address declining levels of physical activity and child health. And of course, there's a third option. Schools could go, we're not going to do anything. there's too much to do, we have a congested curriculum, there are other pressing factors and matters. And actually, if we do 20 minutes more physical activity a day, how much is that, in essence, really going to change that child's overall health and well-being? So do we do something or do we do nothing? So whose responsibility is it to teach and facilitate movement across the whole school? And here I'm framing physical education as in the noun, physical education, big P, big E, the name of the subject, which is a taught, timetabled curricular learning and educational experience. Or are we looking at more generically the broader to be physically educated, which sits within PE, but also outside of physical education? It is our wider education of the body. And everybody and every person has a body, and moving our body, for those, I'm just referring here to Whitehead and Durden-Meyer's reference here about moving our body is a fundamental condition of what it means to be human. And for those of you in England at the moment, and probably across the UK, you'll be aware we have had a great emphasis on the concept of physical literacy being elevated. That could be aligned to this point that we're making here. And that movement shouldn't solely be confined to just sport or PE. Actually, movement and being physical is inherently an experience and an entitlement for all children that should be within the school day, but also outside of the school day. I'm sure many of you have come across the definition of physical activity. And for those of you who are joining us online but can't see access to the slides, I'll read out Casperson's and et al.'s 1985 definition, which is still readily and popularised across literature around physical activity, but also now in policy spaces into defining and framing what physical activity is. And they refer to it as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that results in energy expenditure. And I come to the work of Piggin here, who critiques this definition, saying if we were using this definition to frame what movement is, it reduces movement down to a mechanistic art that is just about expending energy. And movement is much more complex than that. Our reasons, our motivations, our relationship with movement is more than just let's move our body and let's take in energy to ensure that the body can move. That relationship is much, much more nuanced and more complex. So Piggin puts forward a different type of definition, and that is around activity that involves people moving, acting and performing within culturally specific spaces, contexts, and influenced by a unique array of interests, emotions, ideas, instructions, and relationships that allow for the lived experience of people to be recognised. Therefore, I'm using Piggin's reference and definition here and his reframing in 2020 of what physical activity is to kind of put forward the point I'm going to make as we go forward. Now, for those of you that can see the screen, you'll see an image. Now, this picture I took a year and a half ago, and it was on a trail half marathon I was taking part in, and it just made me stop in that moment. I was forgetting about times, forgetting about how far I was in. I was forgetting about, oh my goodness, how am I going to climb that very big hill that's in front of me? And I just took in that countryside. And this countryside is not available via a car or a vehicle. The only way I could have accessed it is by foot. And it kind of took my breath away. And in that moment, it really framed for me that kind of relationship for me with physical activity and movement that I have. And here I draw on Antonovsky's 1979 focus on salutogenesis. And this has really shifted and helped me to frame my thinking more of movement more generally across a whole school. And I will speak to Antonovsky's reference here. And it's in our quest to find health that an adjustment towards our understanding of health is needed. One from pathogenic or pathogenesis, which is around disease prevention, to a greater consideration of salutogenesis, which is a focus on health promotion. And now we can start to see those differences between that option 1 and option 2, where the purpose of moving is not to prevent disease, but it's towards experiencing a life of meaningfulness, well-being, and fulfillment. And therefore, we're making sure that the physical activity context, the movement that a young person is taking, is around creating, as Mittelmark suggests, a sense of coherence. And when we create a sense of coherence, our life is understood to be more or less comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful. The slide I've just put up now is a framing of looking at one end of the spectrum. I've put on one end, we've got the health promotion school, the school that takes physical activity across the whole school and movement and looks at it from a salutogenic focused approach. And that's where the primary aim is for the promotion of movement to create a child's sense of coherence and movement and meaning, where the movement isn't just about counteracting a lack of movement, it is in promoting greater sense of coherence. And I've used an example here where the teacher allows the door to be open, the children can access the outdoors or space to move at any time they need. And when that child needs to, they move, walk, run, talk in any way that their bodies want to help overcome problems, talk an idea through, or respond for their need for their body to move. And this space between the outdoors or the space or the classroom is a fluid space. And I position this against a pathogenic focus school, where the school is going, right, we need to combat sedentary behaviour and inactivity. So what we're going to do is every day at the same time, we're going to require scheduled move time. And at that time, regardless if the child wants it, needs it, or enjoys it at that point, we are going to run around the school playground, the school field, so we can at least meet 10 out of our 60 minutes of recommended moderate to vigorous physical activity that we are guided to do. Now, there are quite different aims and approaches in these two. Both are encouraging and promoting movement, but the motivation, the reason, or that sense of coherence and meaning for that child is made less in one, arguably in the pathogenic focus school, compared to a child that has purpose, meaning, motivation, and agency around that. And so I put forward, and Jess and I have talked about this considerably, and we've put forward in the chapter some different examples of what building a sense of coherence could be like. So an embodied approach to learning, where the mind, we recognise the mind is not independent from the body, in philosophical origins of monism that we see aligned to physical literacy as well. And this is where we understand that connection brings about greater coherence between what I think, what I feel, to what my body does. It allows for greater connection. When we move, we interact with others, we interact with our environment, we interact with people, we interact with objects. We might move to help regulate the development of our emotional regulation. When I feel something in my body, that is helping me recognize that my body needs to do something. So we might respond in physical ways to help manage that sense of regulation. We might move to disrupt sedentary behavior. So we might move for health. And I've also put here, we might move as a third object. So an adult, a classroom teacher, whoever's working with that young person, sometimes when we bring movement into the space, it can act as a distractor to the subject matter that is being taught, a bit like music can do. You know, an empty hall is quite imposing, but when you put some music on, the space is filled up with the music, and movement can act as a way to do that too. And we've seen that, and I've been doing a current study on that in response to movement as a stimulus in philosophy for children, and how moving can act as a conversation starter and encourage young children to think of difficult questions that they might not ordinarily do if they were sat there still. So in summary, human movement is fundamental. It's our natural drive. We want to feel, explore, and connect. It needs to go beyond just combating poor health. It is engagement, coherence, and meaning for our life. If we want to produce salutogenic approaches, so young people don't grow up into young adults and older adults thinking that, oh, I just move so I don't become ill, we need to think of that mind-body connection. We need to think of moving as beyond PE and sport if we're going to really help our young people connect their bodies in diverse ways. As educators, movement-based pedagogies are really powerful. And Stoles has written about that within the physical education context, seeing that the child as a whole being and how that can connect to movement and meaning and performance or health outcomes, over performance, should I say. Many current initiatives at the moment, especially in our policies within the UK, are about fixing poor health, which can then limit our understanding of movement's broader educational value. And by framing movement as meaningful and joyful, we can nurture well-being, we can create healthy populations, and actually the health bit becomes the byproduct, not the primary goal. So there are some references there if anyone would like to follow up on any of those papers I have referred to in the presentation. And anyone online, if they would like to, do reach out to us and I can send them to, like Jez said as well. So I'll stop sharing there. Thank you very much. Oh, Grace, I believe I need to hand over to you. I forgot I was doing that job. Thank you. Over to you.
That's okay. Thanks, Vicky. I'll just get this set up. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Cardiff, and today I'm going to talk about why student voice is so very important and why we need to position it at the heart of primary PE. I will draw on research in the areas of student voice and primary PE, as well as referring to my own experience of putting student voice practices into practice in my own primary classroom and some findings from my PhD research.
Sorry,
So firstly,
do you just want to put that on presentation? It might be just a little bit easier for people to, if it helps.
is it on presentation mode now? No.
We're seeing presenter view, I think. We're seeing notes and things down the side. So it's just no problem. Don't spend too much time technically trying to fix it. It's okay.
Yeah, maybe it's my split screen view that it's not
Yeah, I had the same problem, Grace, where it wasn't compatible for some reason.
Yeah, not to worry, Grace. I think time-wise, just keep going.
Okay. Sorry, now I've lost my screen. Sorry.
Just while Grace is getting herself organized there, can you just say I think people have been engaging with the chat, but if you could put any questions or thoughts or ideas or comments in the chat, we can try to attend to them in a few minutes. Okay, perfect. Oh, perfect, Grace. That's just come up nicely. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to start with a definition of student voice. There's many different definitions of voice. So some people refer to student voice simply as the practice of children sharing their opinions or using their voices in the classroom. Others talk about student voice as this more transformative process in which students are acting as critics and creators of educational practices or the curriculum. And the definition I used for my PhD research falls somewhere in between. I refer to student voice as practices or processes in which students are actively involved in every educational decision-making in the everyday classroom practice. So not something that is done at the beginning of the year and is a survey and then is not revisited again until the end of the year, but it's active and happening every day in the classroom space. And there's also a focus on seeking children's input and feedback on teaching practices, again, in the everyday practice. So obviously, I think student voice is great, and a growing body of research continues to highlight the positive impact of student voice on things like learning outcomes, on student-teacher relationships, and on overall classroom environment. And in PE research more specifically, adopting student voice practices in PE lessons have been shown to motivate and engage students, increase participation, and lead to a more collaborative approach to learning. As part of the OECD's Future of Education and Skills 2030-2040 project, researchers have recognised the need for things like student agency in everyday teaching and learning to ensure that our students now can thrive in our uncertain future. Also, there has been increased mentions of student agency and student voice in policy and curricular documents. So, for example, in Ireland, we have recently redeveloped our primary curriculum, and these curricular documents really position students as active agentic learners, as participants in their teaching and learning process. It sees children as having the capacity to act independently and make choices about and in their learning. And it also talks about things like offering opportunities for children to have a meaningful input into decisions about what and how they learn. So all of this talk about student agency and student voice is fantastic, but the question remains is, what does this actually look like in practice? And how do we do this as teachers or as teacher educators? So student voice research in PE is growing, and there actually is guidance out there on how to do this. Enright and Sullivan have done fantastic work with teenage girls in an urban school setting. They talked about using things like personal biographies and physical activity timelines to get students to reflect and think deeply about their own physical activity experiences and PE experiences. Howley and colleagues have also completed work with high school students and talked about using digital and written reflections, exposing students to taster sessions where they could see different activities in practice, and then have a negotiation class after in which they talk about and plan for future PE lessons based on those taster sessions. In primary PE, more specifically then, Cassandra Iannucci and Melissa Parker have talked about offering choice in primary PE lessons in terms of warm-up games, equipment used, to enlist children's help in designing games for PE, and also in using exit tickets, again, to help children to reflect on their PE experiences. My own PhD research then, I looked at enacting student voice practices in my classroom with 10 and 11-year-old students, and I positioned student voice within a meaningful PE approach. So meaningful PE was guiding my planning, and meaningful PE is underpinned by these reflective and democratic pedagogical principles, and student voice practices offered a concrete strategy for me to realise these reflective and democratic pedagogical principles in my classroom. So on the screen is just a list of some of the things that I tried out. So I was looking at the fantastic research that was already done in PE, and I was trying things and seeing whether they worked for me and for my 10 and 11-year-old students. So this is just a screen grab from one of the articles that I've published. So just to quickly run through some of the things that worked for me. So again, like Iannucci and Parker had mentioned, offering choice as much as possible within my everyday PE lessons. So whether the children chose a warm-up from a selection of warm-ups, or whether they chose the equipment for an activity, or perhaps something like choosing the order of the tasks we complete in that lesson, or the length of the activities that we were completing. Children may have a choice in whether they want a student-selected group or a teacher-selected group for particular games and activities. Choosing challenge level was really important to the children in my class. So it might be that they chose from 3 options that I had set in place already, or that they became more comfortable in adapting and adjusting the challenge level themselves, the more options I gave them. Another thing that worked quite well for myself and my students was offering some free practice or personal practice time within lessons. So it might be 5 minutes at the end of the lesson that they choose to re-practice a skill that we had already practiced in that lesson or previous lessons. Again, an example for me, Iannucci and Parker's research using self-designed games where the children came up with games in their groups. And also reflective pedagogies were really important in helping me to hear their voices, and also in helping them to really reflect on what was important to them in their PE experiences. So what did I find? Well, unsurprisingly, the children loved sharing their opinions. They valued those student voice opportunities. They really appreciated having opportunities to make choices within lessons, and they rose to the opportunity to direct their play and create activities for PE. I also found that reflection was extremely important as part of student voice. And so it helps students to make sense of their experiences and to figure out what it is that works for them in PE and what it is that they want from their PE experiences. It helped me to model language and create this shared language of reflection with the children to support them in expressing their opinions about PE. And it also fostered the sense of community as the children began to see how their decisions weren't only affecting their own PE experiences, but also affecting their peers' PE experiences as well. But enacting student voice wasn't without its barriers. It was a massive learning curve for me. It required a shift in my beliefs and my teacher identity. I had to step back from writing really detailed lesson plans, stuffing activities into every spare second of the lesson, and really making space for my students' voices. Gradual enactment is something that helped me. And I found that I needed to stop looking at student voice practices along a ladder that I was aiming for more and more responsibility and student-led decision-making, and actually view it, I'm stealing Howley and O'Sullivan's words here, but view it as a fluid continuum of practice that involves trial and error. So we don't have to aim for fully student-led decision-making at all times, and that there's equal value in all student voice practices. Something that I have worked on more recently was an Irish Research Council funded project with the Grow Voice team, and we have created some student voice resources that might be of interest to you. So they're available on the Irish Primary PE Association's website, and they have been created with the view of being used by primary school teachers and helping them to enact student voice practices in their own practice. So take a look at those if you're interested. And we have a new publication just yesterday or the day before from that project, in which we worked with primary school teachers in Ireland to help them to enact student voice practices in their own practice. And thank you very much. My contact details are grace.cardiff@mu.ie if anyone would like to get in touch.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for everybody's discussions and conversations. Thank you to everybody who has contributed in the chat and all of our presenters who have answered the questions as we've gone along. We are just going to give Grace just one question. So you've given us the link in terms of the Irish PE student voices in PE, which is wonderful. Thank you. I also added it in the chat for everybody. Could you give us just one starter? If we wanted to go away from today and use the student voice, where would you recommend we start in terms of your wonderful resources?
I think in terms of classroom practice, and I suppose this is part of the Voice PE project research, is to start small. Don't try to start with every amazing thing that you've read about, but just to start with something that you feel comfortable in doing in your own practice. So whether that's just offering choice of a warm-up activity and then building on that. So yeah, start small and start with something that will definitely work for you, so that you're convinced and the students are convinced of the benefits of student voice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Grace. What's wonderful is there's so much discussion going on, which then makes it really exciting from when we get to Taipei, and all of these discussions can continue from now until then. I'm just going to hand to Moira for 1 second and then back to me in a moment.
Hi, everybody. Just to reiterate Christy's words there, thank you to our 3 presenters today. And again, thank you to Kirsty, Risto and Cassandra from the AIESEP side of the house for facilitating this session this morning. I'm delighted. There's been a flurry of activity on my membership list. There's people coming in there. There's also people looking to be allowed onto the LinkedIn website. So we'll get to all of those admin things after this morning. So it's great to see the flurry of activity there. Please do share. Please do tag us in any primary PE related posts on your own social media, so we start sharing what's happening around the world in primary PE. And do watch out for our next Connect session. Christy, we're going to nab one of those sessions from you around March, April, where we will focus on early career researchers and PhD candidates in primary PE. Grace is going to lead out on that one. And just say Nicola Cars and myself will be in Taipei in June, and we will be looking to gather people together. So once the program is circulated, once we have details of where everybody's staying and the actual location, we will get out to our membership list and out on social media the arrangements to meet up. But definitely do look out for us, do say hi, and do join us when in Taipei. We really look forward to building the community, and one that supports the innovation, collaboration, and reinforces centrality of primary physical education in children's lives. So thank you everybody for that. So back to you, Christy, to close out, I think.
Thank you so much. That's a lovely segue into, please don't forget about your abstracts. Abstracts for Taipei close next week. Also, the last minute, if you're doing early careers awards, that also needs to be in by that date as well. So it's all go for next week, and we look forward to seeing you there. I just want to say thank you to everybody. Our next Connect will be in November, and we'll be listening to the Go PE team, who have just finished their big project, and we'll be talking about what they have been doing and how they've been doing it. So it's lovely, continues on, really focusing on PE and how we get it going and how we're moving it. So thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.